The story begins, as so many do, with the deceptive quiet of a perfect evening. It's May 3rd, 2007, in the sun-bleached resort town of Praia da Luz, Portugal. Kate and Jerry McCann are having dinner with friends at a tapas restaurant, just a stone's throw from the holiday apartment where their 3 young children are sleeping. It's a scene of relaxed camaraderie, punctuated by routine checks on the children. Around 9:05 p.m., Jerry McCann looks in on them. All is calm. At about 10 p.m., Kate McCann makes her way to the apartment. She enters the children's bedroom and is met with a silent, chilling void. According to Kate, the window was open and the shutter was raised. It's a claim that would later be disputed by Portuguese police, who argued there was no sign of forced entry. But for a mother in that moment, there was only one terrifying conclusion. Her 3-year-old daughter, Madeleine, was gone. What unfolds next is more than a frantic search for a missing child. It is a spiral of chaos, confusion, and catastrophic error. It is a story of how the very people entrusted to find a little girl may have unwittingly ensured she would never be found. The first hours of any missing person case are what investigators call the golden hours, the most critical window of opportunity to gather evidence and track a perpetrator before the trail goes cold. In the case of Madeleine McCann, this golden window wasn't just missed. It was shattered by a series of bewildering failures. The disappearance of Madeleine McCann is a story of a missing child, but it's also a story of catastrophic police failure. We will expose the 5 critical errors made by investigators from the very beginning, mistakes that destroyed vital evidence and may have cost us a chance to ever know what truly happened to Maddie. These are not just administrative oversights. These are fundamental blunders that contaminated a crime scene, gave an abductor a head start, ignored crucial witnesses, and sent the investigation careening down a dead-end path from which it has never fully recovered. To understand why this case remains an open wound nearly 2 decades later, we must go back to the beginning and examine the 5 police missteps that still haunt the search for Madeleine McCann. The first 24 hours were critical. But what if the people in charge of finding a missing 3-year-old were the same ones who allowed her abductor to vanish without a trace? The moment Kate McCann's scream pierced the night air, a clock started ticking. Every second that passed, the scent grew fainter, the trail colder, and the chances of finding Madeleine alive dwindled. In that desperate crucible of time, a professional, coordinated police response was not just expected. It was the only hope. But what the McCanns and the world would soon discover was that the initial response was anything but professional. It was a masterclass in how not to conduct a missing person investigation. The first and perhaps most unforgivable error happened at the heart of the mystery itself. Apartment 5A, the contamination of the crime scene. In the grammar of criminal investigation, the crime scene is the first and most vital sentence. It tells the story of what happened, who was there, and how they left. It must be preserved with an almost religious reverence, protected from the outside world, so that its secrets can be painstakingly coaxed out by forensic experts. Every fiber, every fingerprint, every stray hair is a potential lead. The protocol is universal and non-negotiable. Seal the area, restrict access, and treat every surface as sacred. In the case of Apartment 5A, this fundamental principle was not just ignored. It was trampled. When the alarm was raised, chaos erupted. Staff from the Ocean Club Resort, other hotel guests, and the McCann's friends rushed to the scene, driven by the desperate human urge to help. They poured into the apartment, searching under beds and closets, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. Their concern was understandable. The police response, however, was inexcusable. The first officers from the local GNR police force arrived, followed by the Polícia Judiciária, or PJ, the detectives tasked with the investigation. Yet, inexplicably, no one took control. The apartment was not properly secured as a crime scene until the early hours of May 4th. Far too late. Before any yellow tape went up, a tidal wave of contamination had already washed over the room, erasing what might have been the only clues to her abductor's identity. It's been estimated that numerous people walked through Apartment 5A. They left their own DNA, their own fingerprints, and their own shoe prints, hopelessly mingling them with any trace the kidnapper might have left behind. The lack of professionalism was staggering. One officer later described the scene as a circus, with people walking in and out of the bedroom, without any caution about preserving evidence. They treated it less like the epicenter of a major crime and more like a casual meeting place. Critics later alleged that officers even smoked cigarettes inside the apartment, potentially corrupting delicate samples. This failure to secure the scene was compounded when McCanns were moved to another apartment the next day, further disrupting the fragile forensic narrative. What does this level of contamination actually mean for an investigation? It means that when forensic teams finally did arrive to dust for prints, they were faced with an indecipherable collage of smudges from dozens of innocent people. Any latent print left by a gloveless abductor on a window frame, the shutter, or the door would be lost in a sea of irrelevant marks. When they swabbed for DNA, they were collecting a soup of genetic material from police, staff, and friends. Trying to isolate a single unknown profile from that jumble would be a near impossible task. Portuguese police later acknowledged that around 20 people had entered the apartment before it was closed off. The story the crime scene could have told with silence before it was ever allowed to speak. This initial failure set the tone for the entire investigation. It was a sign of incompetence at the most basic level, a foundational error from which all subsequent investigative efforts would be built on faulty ground. By failing to protect the one place that held the most answers, the Portuguese police had, in the first 12 hours, dealt a devastating blow to their own case. An abductor who may have been careless, who may have left behind that one crucial mistake, a fingerprint, a drop of sweat, a single hair, was given a gift, the gift of a clean slate, courtesy of the very people tasked with hunting him down. The physical evidence was compromised. The next misstep would ensure the abductor himself had all the time he needed to disappear. Misstep number 2, the delayed border and marine alerts. Imagine an invisible cage. The moment a child is abducted, the first job of law enforcement is to slam the door shut. This means immediate, widespread alerts to all points of exit: land borders, airports, and seaports. In the Algarve region of Portugal, this is not a theoretical exercise. The Spanish border is a short drive away, offering a direct escape route into the rest of Europe. The nearby marinas are bustling hubs, with boats constantly departing for international waters. Shutting these gates is not just procedural. It is the single most effective way to trap a kidnapper within a geographic area. For Madeleine McCann, that cage was never built. The doors were left wide open for hours on end. The alarm was raised around 10 p.m. The urgency could not have been higher. Every officer in Portugal should have been operating under the assumption that an abductor was on the move and that their primary goal was to flee. Yet, the response was defined by a baffling and fatal lack of urgency. The Spanish border, the most obvious escape route by car, was not formally notified of a missing 3-year-old British girl until the following morning. During that time, roadblocks were not established until 10 a.m. the next day. No special alerts were issued to border guards. No heightened security checks were put in place. Let's put that in practical terms. An abductor could have placed Madeleine in a car, driven calmly east along the A22 motorway, and crossed into Spain before the guards at the border even knew a child was missing. They would have faced no more scrutiny than any other tourist. For hours, the primary land exit from the country was operating as normal. An abductor could have been hundreds of kilometers away, deep into another country's jurisdiction, before the first official alert even crackled over a Spanish police radio. It was a head start of many hours, a gift of time that is immeasurable in the context of a kidnapping. The failure was just as profound at sea and in the air. Both marine and airport police were not given a description of Madeleine for many hours. Any potential kidnapper with access to a boat could have been in international waters and virtually untraceable within hours. Each vessel that sailed away into the night was a potential getaway vehicle, leaving without inspection or question. This wasn't just a simple delay. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the crime. The police's initial working theory seemed to lean toward the idea that Madeleine had simply wandered off. This is a common occurrence with young children, and in most cases, they are found safe nearby. A former Met detective, Colin Sutton, noted that in policing, there is often reluctance to overreact or escalate a situation. But the details here screamed abduction. A 3-year-old does not open a window, manipulate a heavy shutter, and vanish from a ground-floor apartment without a trace. The signs pointed to a criminal act, one that required an immediate an overwhelming response to seal all exits. The consequence of this misstep is chilling. It created a vast, unmonitored escape corridor for a potential kidnapper. While a disorganized search was beginning on the ground in Praia de Luz, the perpetrator could have been putting miles of road or ocean between themselves and the scene of the crime. The golden hours for capture, not just for evidence collection, were ticking away. The failure to notify border and marine police in a timely manner is one of the most haunting aspects of the case. It represents a colossal missed opportunity. The cage door was left open, and it is overwhelmingly likely that during those first crucial hours, the person who took Madeleine McCann simply walked or drove or sailed right through it. Misstep number 3, the haphazard local searches. When a child goes missing from a contained environment like a holiday resort, the search should expand in systematic, concentric circles. The first circle is the immediate vicinity. Every room, every closet, every vehicle, and every person. This process, known as canvassing, is painstaking but essential. It's designed to do two things simultaneously. Find a child if they are hidden or trapped nearby, and identify witnesses who saw or heard something, no matter how insignificant it might seem. A proper canvass is methodical, it is immediate, and it is thorough. In Praia de Luz, the initial search operation was the antithesis of this disciplined approach. It was, as critics have described, haphazard. Instead of systematic circles, the search resembled a scattered, disorganized panic. Critically, there were no immediate and systematic house-to-house, or in this case, apartment-to-apartment. Inquiries conducted in the hours after Madeleine vanished. This is a staggering failure. According to some reports, comprehensive searches of other apartments did not begin until a full 48 hours after she was reported missing. For 2 full days, an abductor could have been holding Madeleine in a nearby apartment, just meters from the searchers, with little fear of being discovered. This delay also meant that potential witnesses were not identified or interviewed when their memories were freshest. People check out of holiday resorts. They move on. It has also been alleged that many resort staff weren't questioned for up to 60 hours. By that time, many guests who were there on the night of May 3rd would have already left, taking any potential information with them. Perhaps the most famous example of this failure is the handling of the Tanner sighting. One of McCann's friends, Jane Tanner, reported seeing something highly significant at around 9:15 p.m., shortly before Madeleine was discovered missing. She saw a man walking away from the direction of McCann's apartment, carrying a child in his arms. This was, and remains, one of the most compelling pieces of witness testimony in the case. In a competent investigation, this lead would have been treated as red hot, but this didn't happen with the urgency required. While the information was passed to police that night, the description wasn't released to the media for over 3 weeks, and the opportunity to quickly gather more information about him was lost in the disorganized shuffle of the initial response. Years later, Scotland Yard would conclude that the man Jane Tanner saw was likely an innocent British holidaymaker carrying his own sleeping child, a man who was eventually identified. But the point is not whether the specific sighting was the abductor or not. The point is the failure of the Portuguese police to immediately and aggressively investigate it. It was the best lead they had in the first hour, and it went cold because of a lack of systematic police work on the ground. The search was further hampered by a perceived lack of resources. Dozens of officers and volunteers searched the surrounding scrubland and buildings, but the effort was described as patchy and uncoordinated. There was no clear grid system, no central command ensuring that every square inch was covered. The failure to conduct immediate and thorough local searches was a multi-layered disaster. It was a missed opportunity to find Madeleine if she was being held nearby. It was a missed opportunity to secure secondary crime scenes. And it was a missed opportunity to gather vital witness testimony before memories faded and people dispersed. The investigation was failing at every level. And as the hours bled into days, the police would make another catastrophic error, this time not of inaction, but a misguided action by focusing their attention on the wrong person entirely. Misstep number 4, the erroneous focus on Robert Murat. In the confusing fog of a high-profile investigation, the pressure to find a suspect can become immense. The media descends, the public demands answers, and investigators can feel an overwhelming need to show progress. It is in this high-pressure environment that the risk of tunnel vision becomes acute. This is precisely what happened on May 14, 2007, just 11 days after Madeleine disappeared. The Portuguese police named their first official suspect, or arguido. His name was Robert Murat. Murat was a British-Portuguese property consultant who lived with his mother just a short walk from apartment 5A. He had inserted himself into the investigation from the early stages, offering his services as a translator. His eagerness to help, combined with his proximity to the scene, drew the attention of journalists, who then passed on their suspicions to the police. While police may have had other reasons for their interest, it appears that media suspicions heavily influenced their focus, despite a lack of strong evidence. Once Murat was named, the full weight of the investigation and the world's media fell upon him. His home was searched, his life was meticulously picked apart, and his face was plastered across newspapers and television screens globally. He became the villain in the story, the focal point for public anger and suspicion. The problem was, he was entirely innocent. The focus on Robert Murat was not just a personal tragedy for him. It was a disastrous misdirection for the investigation at a critical time. For months, valuable resources and investigative hours were poured into building a case against him. This diverted attention away from pursuing other, more promising leads. The man from the Tanner sighting, other potential witnesses, and the broader theory of an opportunistic abduction by a stranger were all sidelined while the police apparatus zeroed in on Murat. The investigation developed a severe case of tunnel vision, and for a crucial period, the search for the real abductor effectively ground to a halt. The consequences for Murat were devastating. The baselessness of the allegations against him was later confirmed when he and his associates sued 11 British newspapers for libel. They received a settlement of £600,000 and front-page apologies. It was a public and costly admission that the media frenzy was built on a foundation of lies and innuendo. In July 2008, more than a year after he was named a suspect, the Portuguese authorities finally shelved their investigation and lifted Murat's arguido status. But the damage was done. An immense amount of time had been wasted chasing a ghost, all while the real perpetrator's trail grew colder by the second. The erroneous focus on Robert Murat stands as a stark lesson in the dangers of investigative tunnel vision. It highlights a police force that seemed to be grasping at straws. This misstep did more than just ruin an innocent man's life. It choked the investigation during a period when it was still possible that new leads could emerge. The police had failed to protect the evidence, failed to secure the escape routes, and failed to properly search the area. Now, they had failed to even identify a credible line of inquiry. The final misstep, however, would reveal that their incompetence extended even to the most basic handling of the few pieces of physical evidence that had survived the initial chaos. Misstep number 5, catastrophic forensic errors. Forensic science is the bedrock of modern policing. But for science to work, the evidence must be collected with meticulous care. We've already seen how the failure to secure Apartment 5, it created a whirlwind of contamination. What followed, according to critics and later reports, was a series of specific forensic blunders that may have ensured any remaining clues would be lost forever. One of the most shocking allegations concerns the very bed where Madeleine was last seen. Some accounts claim that by the time police returned for a detailed forensic examination, more than 24 hours had passed and cleaners had entered the room. In that interval, it's alleged the sheets, blankets, and pillowcase from Madeleine's bed, items that could have held a treasure trove of forensic evidence, were stripped and washed. Any stray fibers, any hair, any trace of DNA could have been washed away. But the questions didn't stop there. Sitting on Madeleine's bed was her favorite soft toy, a pink cat often referred to as Cuddle Cat. This toy was with her constantly. It would have been saturated with her DNA, but crucially, it was also an object the abductor may have touched or moved. Critics point out that such an item should have been immediately bagged and sent for priority DNA analysis. Instead, it appears the toy was not initially seized for testing by police and was eventually returned to Kate McCann, who, unaware of its full forensic potential, later washed it. Another potential opportunity to recover the abductor's DNA was lost. The list of alleged forensic failures goes on. It's been reported that when police finally sought to retrieve CCTV footage from the Ocean Club Resort, they were too late, as the system had already recorded over the footage from the night of May 3rd. Critics also argue that early searches failed to deploy specialized tools effectively, like high-intensity UV lights, which can reveal latent bodily fluids. Finally, there was a handling of digital evidence. In the 21st century, CCTV is one of the most powerful tools investigators have. Yet, reports have criticized the collection of footage from the Ocean Club and other local businesses as slow and sporadic, lacking the urgency needed to secure video before it was deleted. Any images of the abductor's vehicle or the man himself may have been gone forever. Taken together, these forensic errors, if true, represent a collapse of investigative discipline. The potentially washed bedding, the untested toy, and the wiped CCTV, each one is a catastrophic failure in its own right. Combined, they form a pattern of alleged negligence that is difficult to comprehend. They ensured that even if the police had managed to identify a credible suspect, they would have had almost no physical evidence to link them to crime. The abductor had left the scene, but the police had failed to read it. They had allowed it to be contaminated and let its most valuable secrets be washed down the drain. The story of the search for Madeleine McCann is a labyrinth of false leads, conflicting theories, and enduring mystery. But at its very beginning, at the foundation of it all, lie these 5 profound and irreversible errors. First, the failure to secure the crime scene, which allowed a circus of people to contaminate vital evidence. Second, the inexplicable delay in issuing border and marine alerts, which handed the kidnapper an open door to escape. Third, the haphazard and delayed local searches, which squandered the chance to find Madeleine or identify key witnesses. Fourth, the erroneous and damaging focus on an innocent man, Robert Murat, a misdirection that wasted precious months. And fifth, the series of catastrophic forensic blunders, from wash bedding to lost CCTV, that destroyed the very evidence needed to solve the crime. These were not minor oversights. They were fundamental failures that created a cascade of investigative chaos. This initial incompetence arguably led directly to later, more public missteps. The desperate attempt to name Kate and Jerry McCann as suspects based on inconclusive DNA evidence found in their hire car that British scientists couldn't definitively match was a direct result of the investigation having no other credible leads. It was a diversion that only served to deepen the tragedy, and for which senior Portuguese officers have reportedly since apologized to McCanns. Years later, the British Metropolitan Police would launch Operation Grange, a multi-million-pound effort to essentially start from scratch. They treated the case from the outset as what many critics believe it always should have been, a criminal act by a stranger, likely a planned abduction. Today, German authorities have identified a prime suspect, Christian B., a convicted sex offender who was in the area at the time. Searches have been conducted, but he has never been charged in connection with Madeleine's disappearance, and he denies any involvement. It leaves us with the most haunting question of all. Could this case have been solved in May of 2007? If the crime scene had been sealed, if the borders had been closed, if the searches had been immediate and thorough, if the right leads had been pursued, and if the evidence had been properly handled, would we know what happened to Madeleine McCann? It is impossible to say for certain, but it is equally impossible to ignore the devastating probability that these 5 missteps didn't just hamper the investigation. They may have doomed it from the start. They are the ghosts that still haunt this case, a tragic reminder that in the search for a missing child, there is no room for error. The cost is simply too high.